In this video, I'm going to give you an introduction to Flames entity models from a software development standpoint. An entity model is, in Flames, a class that has inherited the Flames entity class, which is pretty much every type of model that you are able to develop for Flames, all of the different types of Flames models. There's actually a higher level class above F-entity called F-component. And I'm showing that to you here in the Flames class hierarchy diagram. This is not the entire Flames class hierarchy, of course, but it's the class hierarchy for the root, the abstract classes for all the different types of classes that can be developed for Flames. So the base class is the F-component class. And there are entities, services, and overlays that descend from F-component. So everything in this class hierarchy is a component. And then there's the F-message class, which doesn't inherit anything. So that's just out there. That's a very simple class. We'll talk about that in another video. But as you can see, the vast majority of the classes in this hierarchy are a descendant of F-entity. So when we talk about an entity model in Flames, what we're saying is it's a class that has descended from this class hierarchy, which most of which is a descendant of the F-entity class. The classes in gray in this class hierarchy, and by the way, this class hierarchy diagram is in the Flames documentation. So if you open the documentation, the main Flames documentation, and you search for Flames class hierarchy, you'll see this in the search output, and you can click on it and you'll be able to see the same diagram. The classes that are in gray background, those are abstract classes that cannot be inherited directly. And we're actually showing here two classes that can't be inherited just to show you that they are also members of the Flames class hierarchy. These are classes that are only used internally within Flames. But all the other classes have subclasses that can be inherited. The classes in blue are classes that can be inherited or should be inherited if you're developing your class in C. The classes in red are classes that you should inherit if you're developing classes in C++. So you can see that all the classes here have C++ abstract classes, and all the Flames models or the vast majority of the models that come in the content and in our repository are written in C++. That's the preferred language for doing Flames model development. Now, I've used the term abstract class. In case you don't know what that is, an abstract class is a class that is not able to be instantiated. So you can't create FCPP airspace objects that are only airspace objects. You have to have a subclass, what is called a concrete class, that inherits this class, and the concrete class can be inherited. So you can create objects out of the concrete class. So again, all of these classes are children of the F-entity class, and that's why the behavior of Forge is so common, so similar for all the different types of models that are being used in Forge. So here I have Forge up, and I don't have any scenario loaded, and I've got just a couple of windows here. So the sensor model sensor models are entity models. They are subclasses of F-entity. Platform models are, cognition models are, and that's why there's a common way to manipulate or to manage cognition models, and it's the same as the way you manage platform models and the same as the way you manage sensor models. They all these windows have the same set of menus or very similar set of menus across the top. They all have current data set, loaded sensors, and of course you know that. And here's the section for the specific user interface of a given class. So, and we're going to talk about how this user interface can get created for each entity model class it has its own user interface. So the fact that all Flames models, or almost all of them, descend from the F-entity class is extremely important. It means that the things that you learn in these development tutorials about entity model development and entity classes are going to apply to any type of class that you, or almost any type of modeling class that you create for Flames. There are quite a few tutorial videos on entity model development, so there's quite a bit to learn about entity model development, but once you learn it, you've learned things that will apply to all the different types of models, pretty much every type of model that you'll develop for Flames. Now let's take a quick look at the source code of an entity model. So you've already done your development setup, and so you should have a Visual Studio project that or solution that has these two projects in it. So I'm going to go to the F-Tutorial project, and I've got here source code for pretty much every type of entity model that can be developed for Flames. We don't have everyone in here, but we have almost all of them. And the class that we're going to be using for quite a few of the tutorials is going to be the F-Sensor class, or a subclass of F-Sensor. And it's actually going to be this class called EXM Sensor. So I'm going to use this again as in a lot of the entity model development tutorial videos, and again, the things that we learn about this class are going to apply to pretty much every class that you'll ever develop for Flames. So let me just show you the main files that are in a typical entity model class, and for the classes that you get from the Flames repository, you'll see these files. You might not see all of them, you might see a couple of more, but most entity classes will have these same set of files. So each entity class has a name, of course, and we usually name the folder with the name of the class, and then the class has a class abbreviation. The class abbreviation is what we use to begin the names of all the files that are associated with this class. So in this case, the class name is EXM Sensor, the class abbreviation is EXMSN. So that's the prefix on all these files. So the class file that's named with just the abbreviation, we'll call that the main class file. And that has all of the class initialization and many of the base methods, and we'll talk about those in a later video. The H file has the definition of the class itself, and I'm going to go ahead and open that up. So it has a include file macro for including the files that are necessary to define the data types that are used to create a class that inherits FCPP sensor. And that macro is talked about in a previous video. So here's the class definition. So as we saw in the class hierarchy, it inherits FCPP sensor. And here's our class. And we'll talk about more about the specific structure of this class definition, but that's what we have. And usually the only thing in the file is just the definition of the class. Then we'll have several other files that contain other methods, the attribute methods, the execution methods. Now we're not going to talk about the execution methods. In this case, a sensor has a detection method. Some of these files are specific to the particular subclass that we're inheriting. So since this is a sensor, there's some things that are here, some files that are here that are specific to sensors. But the attribute file, ATTR, that file is present in most entity models. The IO file has IO methods, and we'll talk about that in each of these files in more detail in a later video. A lot of files won't have an IO. A lot of classes won't have an IO file because we're able to use the default IO capability, and we don't need an IO method. IO means IO to the Flames database. It's the way that an entity model saves and retrieves its data from the Flames scenario database. The TP file right here, tp.tp, that is a file that is used to define the user interface for an entity model. And we have a compiler that generates code from that and creates this tp.cpp file. And that's code that you don't have to edit, that's automatically generated. And then there's a user interface file to provide some additional methods that are used only when the class is used in a graphical application for editing, like Forge. In Fire, the functions in this file do not get called because Fire does not have a graphical user interface. And this particular file is just used to support tutorials. It's actually not part of the class. So you'll see most of these files will be present in every class. So for example, let me go to a specific class that's implemented. Here's a radar, and you can see it doesn't have an IO file, but it's got a base file, it's got an attribute file, it's got the TP file, and it's got the UI file. And then here's some things that are specific to a real radar model. I'll go to a platform model that we have, the base file, the include file, the attribute file, a couple of files that are specific to platforms, the template file, and the UI file. But we'll talk about each of those files in a successive video. So that's all I want to tell you to introduce you to entity models. Thank you for watching, and thank you for using Flames.